Congressman Buddy Carter, who represents our viewers in Southeast Georgia. Immigration was one of our topics. But Florida early voting begins this coming week, and Georgia's early voting polls are already open. We are closing quickly on the nation's general election.
Well, I'm feeling good. I feel like the momentum is on our side. I think it's on President Trump's side. I think it's on the Republican side. We owe our veterans so much, and they're the reason that we enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy. But perhaps the greatest freedom we have is the freedom to vote and elect our leaders. And this is something we should take advantage of. This is something we should exercise, if for no other reason, to thank our veterans for their service to our country and for giving us this freedom to vote.
Obviously, Georgia is a key state among the swing states that will ultimately decide the election when it comes to who's going to the White House to serve there. When you look at what happened, even on the very first day of early voting in Georgia, setting records there, is that encouraging?
It is very encouraging. I've been saying, come hurricane or high water, we're going to vote. And I think people in Georgia want to vote this year. I think that we want to prove, and particularly conservatives and particularly on the Republican ticket, that 2020 was an anomaly, and that, people are saying we're a swing state, and I get where you can make that argument, but, every one of our statewide elected officials is Republican, with the exception of our two senators. So I would submit to you that we're still a red state, perhaps trending purple, but at the same time, we're still a Republican state.
Lots was made out of the election results of 2020, even litigation going on still about that. We heard Brad Raffensperger this week, the Secretary of State there, over all the elections, saying we're going to have a good election here. Do you have confidence in that?
Well, I do. I have confidence that it's going to be better than it was in 2020. And the primary reason for that is because the Georgia State Legislature passed the Election Integrity Act, which makes voting easier and cheating harder. And I applaud them for that. I think that was a good move. I think that they have made improvements to the voting system, and I think that the Elections Board continues to make improvements. So my confidence level in this being an accurate and fair election is much higher this time.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what our two states, Georgia and Florida, have experienced recently, and that's disaster with hurricanes, Hurricane Helene and then Hurricane Milton. And it kind of became a political talking point because of questions about the availability of resources from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. How do you feel about what FEMA's doing? And FEMA is saying, hey, we are going to be able to respond to the needs of the people in Georgia and in Florida.
Well, first of all, look, I've lived in South Georgia all my life, and Helene was the most devastation I've ever witnessed. I've never seen anything really close to it. Georgia Power said that it was the most destructive storm they've ever seen. People are on edge right now. I think FEMA is probably doing the best that they can right now. There are still some people, even in our district, who still don't have power and are not looking to have power for perhaps another month or so. That's a long time to go without power, but it was such a destructive storm. We had over 8,000 poles that were down. I went to the staging area and visited some of the line workers. They were telling me it takes 2.5 hours to replace one pole. And that's a lot of work, over 1,000 miles of wire that had to be replaced. Just the devastation alone. But I'm confident that we're going to be able to, that FEMA is going to be able to deliver, and that they're going to be there when we need them.
We heard even earlier this week that the president was saying, hey, the money will come in even if we have to wait until Congress is back after the election. Is that something that you would support, more money for disaster relief if needed?
If needed, absolutely. But let me be clear, before we left in September, when we passed the continuing resolution, we also included $20 billion for FEMA. Only $1 billion of that has been spent. If we need to go back, I'm willing to go. I'll get on a plane right now and go back to appropriate more if we need to, but I don't think we're going to need to. Now, the SBA, the Small Business Administration, is out of funds, and we need them to be replenished. And if we need to go back and vote for that, then I'm going to insist that we do that. But at the same time, FEMA's budget is different from other agencies because you can't just budget an amount for FEMA. We don't know what the disasters are going to be. So we just have to base it on the year before, and then, we may have to fill in more if we need to, depending on how many disasters we have.
Congressman, when it comes to this election coming up here, immigration policy is certainly something that's been back and forth. Where do you stand on this? And are there some policies that you would like to see instituted regardless of who goes to the White House when inauguration happens in January?
Absolutely. And those policies would be the policies of the Trump administration before he left office. The Remain in Mexico policy, build the wall, making sure that we are halting people from coming in here. You know, you hear various numbers about how many illegals are in this country, anywhere from 16 to 21 million. But regardless of what it is, we're not naive enough to believe that some of those aren't coming across that border with the intent to hurt us and to do bad things. That's what we got to be careful of. Plus, we have to remember the illegal drugs that are flowing across that country. The number one cause of death now in this country for those between 18 and 40 is fentanyl poisoning. We've got to stop those drugs coming across that border. It's infesting all of our communities.
The Vice President Harris campaign has made it a point to say, hey, there's got to be a difference between, yes, securing the border and humane treatment of the people who are coming across the border. How would you reconcile that?
Well, look, we all want people to be treated humanely. I don't think that's a partisan issue. Of course, we want them to be treated humanely. And I would submit to you that with that border not being secure, that it's inhumane, because they are risking their life coming up here to cross that border. And many of them that are being abused and sexually and in other ways physically. That in itself is inhumane. So to secure that border, I think, would be a more humane situation for everyone.
On the topic of maybe economic opportunity, the Harris campaign reaching out even this week to black voters and saying, hey, we've got an agenda here that will help there. We know lots of reaching out to the Latino community as well recently. But there's also data that says President Trump's campaign has earned a lot of support in both of those communities. Is that a key part of these final 2 weeks, getting those votes?
I think it is. I think it is a key part of it. And look, and regardless of what the color of your skin is a job, and people want to work, and they want to have the opportunity to achieve the American dream of being successful and having a job and providing for their families. And that's why the economy is such an important part of this election coming up. You know, I always say elections have consequences because policies have consequences. And this election is about policy. Forget about all the noise about he said this about her, she said this about him. Concentrate on policy. If you look, the Trump policies worked when he was in office. Inflation was at 1.4%. Now look at it. Yes, it's down to 2.4%. But what is it cumulative over the last 4 years? Over 20.5%. People are hurting now. People have less money in their pocket than they did before. They're trying to decide whether to buy gas or buy groceries. That's not a good situation, and that's why policies matter.
All right, so 16 days until the election, and we're getting more information for voters this morning. An ardent supporter of the vice president's campaign. We're talking with a man who appeared on the stage at the Democratic National Convention. Congressman Joaquin Castro will chime in, offering his perspective.